This episode contains sensitive topics, including sexual assault, human trafficking of minors, drug use, and mental health struggles that could be triggering for some listeners. Due to these topics, this episode may not be appropriate for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you are experiencing emotional distress, reach out to a mental health professional. Hey y'all, welcome back to Shootin' the Breeze. Today we're kicking off a 3-part series that delves into the harsh realities of human trafficking, as well as the hope and resilience of survivors. Throughout these episodes, I will have the privilege of speaking with Alicia Tappan, a survivor of human trafficking and founder of the nonprofit Survivor-Led Solutions. In this episode, Alicia will share her deeply personal story, how she found herself in this unimaginable situation, the challenges she faced in breaking free, and how her faith has played a pivotal role in her healing and advocacy. This is a raw and inspiring conversation that shines a light in the darkness. Let's get started. All right, guys. So I am here with Alicia Tappan, and she has graciously agreed to share her story, provide some information for us on what human trafficking is, how we can prevent it, and ways that she is helping to combat human trafficking now, currently in our community. So I've got a few questions for Alicia. For today, we're going to start out, and I just want to know more about your story, Alicia. Could you share your story and how you found yourself in the situation of being trafficked?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Micaela. And I really appreciate you bringing me on to just speak on this topic. I know it's one of those conversations that are taboo, but the more we talk about it, the more we can actually help and prevent. What you need to know about me is that I came from a middle-class family, both parents at home, younger brother, a dog. I was a leader in my school. I had ambitions to become a doctor. I just didn't know what kind. And I did not see it coming. So when we say, it's not going to happen to my child's too smart. I've taught her stranger danger and all of the things that should help prevent. But what we don't see is when somebody is posing as a helper and they're really a predator. And in my case, it was a coach of the male track team. And you might say, well, Alicia, did you run track? No, I wasn't a male student. I was the student council president, National Honor Society president. But my friends ran track. And when we won the end of the year state track meet, he had a party at his house. Think about it as like going to your youth group leader, right? Like he was a trusted adult. He had a lot of charismatic qualities. He was fun. People liked him. He helped out in the community. And yet he did it all under this guise as, I'm just a track coach. He invited us over, we hang out, and then around 8 o'clock, he says to parents and faculty, hey, we had a great year. It's Friday, it's summer. Let's let the kids hang out. I'll kick them out around 10 o'clock. And so the adults all left. And I was actually staying the night down the street at my best friend's house. And she had invited me over. What I did not know was that she was putting me in a position to become vulnerable. She knew this, these parties that he had. She had probably been a victim herself. And what we know is people who are hurting hurt other people.
Right.
So I'm there, right, with the unintention of anything negative happening. I thought, I'm safe. I can drive. I don't drink. The alcohol wasn't even around. So what any trafficker does at the very beginning of their kind of preying situation is that they'll expose you to sexual content. And it might be in person, it might be a photograph, it might be a video. And in our case, it was a video. So when we all go into his house, about a dozen high school students, he says, hey guys, I want you to watch this movie, but I don't want to be responsible for pushing play. And
Ooh.
without a moment notice, right, the funny kid of the group jumps up and goes over and hits play on the VCR because that's how old this is. And so we're watching this video, a homemade porn by two of our friends, and we all sat in shock when it ended 2.5 minutes later without like another moment passing. I swear, like in my brain, it was just like we were watching this movie, my jaw drops, and then in come the main characters of this movie down into the basement where now it's a party.
Oh,
And
wow.
this guy knew exactly what to do. He turned down the lights, turned up the music, and opened the bar. And now it's a party. I kind of look at my friend like, what the heck? This is weird. She's like, it's cool. I just want to talk to somebody, but we can leave in a minute. So I'm like trying to stay cool, right? Because peer pressure is very real. It doesn't matter how smart or confident you are. In those situations, you don't know what to do. You've never been in that situation. No one really teaches you what to do in that situation. I just kind of wait. I can't tell you exactly what happened. He's serving drinks. I know I don't drink. I tell people I don't drink. They know that. But it doesn't matter. He makes his own date rape drug and he roofies us all. The next moment I have is my head hitting the back of a hot tub, and now I'm being raped by two of my friends. I panicked. And I jump out of the hot tub and I'm trying to find my clothes. I can't find anything. Next thing I know, I'm being pushed up against the wall, told you're too drunk to drive. You can't go anywhere.
Mm.
And I guess I pass out. I don't really know because the next memory I have is waking up under the coffee table in the basement with no one else around and my keys and stuff neatly packed on top of it. And I smelled like somebody else's shampoo, like I'd been washed.
Ugh.
To make a long story short, I didn't know what to do with that situation. I asked a couple of times, right? I went to my work the next day and I said, hey, I think I had sex with two guys in one night. Like, what does that mean? And my supervisor, who was only a few years older than me, says, you might as well get used to being called a slut because that's all you'll ever be known as.
Wow. That's
And then I get home and I call my best friends, right? You left me at that party. I think I was raped. And they said, well, rape's a really strong word, Alicia. You don't want to go around accusing anybody, do you? These guys have full ride scholarships. I was silenced twice by my peers. Do you think I'm going to go tell my parents?
no, absolutely not.
No. Our truth is based by our peers. And if they say you're lying, then you must have done something. So now it's my fault. This leads to an entire summer of being picked up by these guys, taken to other parties, raped by people I don't know, left in stranded at colleges. And, while the parents are celebrating their kids' graduation, I was being raped in the bathroom floor, drunk and passed out. And, people go, well, if it was so bad, why didn't you leave? There was no leaving, right? You are now a possession. So what that meant was they are going to beautify you. They're going to take you out and spoil you. They're going to make you feel like you're the best thing that ever happened, you know? And I wasn't dating any of these guys, but they were all told to come pick me up and take me to the next party, buy me whatever I wanted, get me drunk, roofie me, and then let them take advantage of me. I found out I was worth $50, some cocaine, and some points that he created. This coach had created a point system.
Oh,
So
wow.
the more virginal you were, the higher the points, right? By the end of the summer, I was basically thrown away. When school started, my depression was fully set in. I now had an alcohol and drug problem. I was angry, right? I was pushing everything down, so I became numb. My parents obviously noticed a change and they just thought I was a hormonal teenager worried about graduating. I wasn't going to talk to them. I shut them out of my life and I hid, right? I cut my hair and I tried to reinvent myself. And when school started, my rapist from the hot tub that night came up to me, pushed me, and said, we're cool, right? And I knew what he meant. We're not going to talk about what happened this summer. I went through the next 3 months of the first semester of my senior year completely a different person. I got suspended and I found myself suicidal. I attempted 3 times and couldn't die. So I didn't feel like living and I also couldn't die. So I didn't know what my purpose was. I lost all sight of going to college or anything that was going to motivate me to become a successful adult. My brain had been rewired. So it wasn't until my athletic director who sort of pulled me aside and he says, what happened to you? And I guess I did what anybody else might do. I've actually heard this by other survivors, and they say, you feel like you have that one last chance to tell and see if they'll do anything. It's almost like a test.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tested him, right? And I said, I don't know. I think I was raped. Why? And he was like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. And so he said, let's get you through your senior year. You're really smart. You're a leader. Come to my office. And he just pumped me with affirmations about going to college. That was actually what made me kind of stabilize. And in that, he started an investigation and found out there were 33 other victims just like me.
Wow.
It was an incredible experience in the worst of ways. because, I just felt like I was in trouble. Obviously, my parents had to find out, and we decide, we're going to go to court. And all these girls and their moms came over to my house and they started, you know, screaming and chanting, like, we're going to, castrate this guy. We're going to put him in jail, like all these things. And I was like, I just want to get out of here. Like, I don't want to hold on to this. I don't want to go to court. And I could tell that the other girls were nervous too. My mom looked at me and she said, if not you, then who? Who's going to do it? Because he's already hurt all these other people. You need to make it stop with you. But he'd already moved to a new school and started this whole thing again. I said, okay, as long as I can go to college, because I started to have these ideas that I'd go reinvent myself somewhere else. And I agreed. We went through 2 years of just re-victimization, being that girl in the hot tub. And if I don't remember that being raped in detail, then how do I know? How did the lawyer know that I didn't rape those guys? Right?
Right.
Like those are things that happen. And I remember thinking, I'll be really transparent, that those guys who raped me were also victims of this coach in that particular hot tub situation because he had groomed them, he had recruited them, he had made them feel special and then used them. And then he sold their sex tapes. It's child rape online. We win the court case. He goes to prison for 7 years, gets his law degree, gets out, rapes and beats his wife. She drops the charges, files for divorce. He becomes an executive of an estate, embezzles $140,000 in 4 months, has the same judge that we had 10 years earlier, and now he's in prison for the rest of his life. I don't know if I felt the validation during court, but I can sit here 20 years later and tell you best decision I ever made as a child. And I know that he hurt so many more people who may never feel justified in their healing process. I know it took me a long time to recognize that I was a victim, even because I thought that I was, the one who did this. I put myself in that position. I went to that party. And then I spent 10 years after having put him in prison, just self-sabotaging, self-exploiting, getting into the strip clubs, getting into the escort service system, online dating. That became a thing. And I would literally use men so that I could get rent. I became the person who hurt me.
Right.
And I needed to figure out how to unwire that part of my brain. So, to kind of wrap up my story, I didn't know what I didn't know. And it wasn't until I met another survivor of sex trafficking and she tells her story. And I swear I fell to my knees and I was like, that's what happened to me. I didn't know that's what this was called, right? Like, and I was like, I actually put my guy in jail. And, she didn't have that same justice. It wasn't until those kind of walls came down and the ceiling lifted, that I wasn't just this product of rape, but that I had been used as a pawn in a bigger game. And it's an entire lifestyle. And it made so much sense on why I acted the way I did in my 20s and running, just running all the time. So I really wanted to change that. And I'm proud to say that I am now on the other side helping survivors get out of their situations.
Wow, my God, it's such a powerful story, and I can really appreciate that you use the word rape because in talking to friends and survivors of rape, not necessarily human trafficking, a lot of times they'll say, well, I was drugged and I don't really remember. And they kind of use all this mollycoddling language around it.
Exactly.
And it's not, when you get down to brass tacks, you were drugged. You weren't aware of what was happening. You did not consent. Let's call it what it is. So I really, I want to point that out for our listeners. I really appreciate that, even though it's not flourishing language, it's what you have to call it. So I know you said in the moment there were no signs, right? Looking at it as a child, and I appreciate that you call yourself a child, even though you're a senior in high school. We don't typically look at them as children, but you were a child. What
Yeah.
were some of the warning signs that made you vulnerable to trafficking that you maybe recognize in hindsight, if there are any?
Well, yeah. One of the sex tapes had been leaked in the school. And I normally don't get to talk about this, so I do want to take a moment. And it was at the time that Paris Hilton, so pop culture, there was sex tapes being leaked on the internet. And so everybody in authority thought that this tape was just a fad, right? They were just copying what
Wow.
other people were doing. And that was not the case. So that was a big warning sign to me. I overheard the guy and girl who were worried about talking to their parents because they're about to have a parent teacher conference and they were like, you can't talk about where this was made. I heard that in the bathroom once. And then, the coach had his favorites. So he had these guys who, if they couldn't afford a uniform, he'd pay for it. If they didn't show up to practice on time, he'd give them rides. If they failed a math test, he'd go get extra credit, right? Like, so he was doing favors for kids and it's popularity, sure, but it's also this recruiting and grooming process. He was giving them the things that they needed, filling that need. And he acted like a father to the fatherless. So he definitely went after those kids who had single parents at home. Those are some things that I noticed right away. The other things that I want people to know is that simply our age, when we're under 18, actually under 25, right? Your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25. Your age alone makes you vulnerable because you don't have the rationale to know when somebody's lying. Like unless we catch them, right? We just sort of have this gut feeling that we're not really even sure about yet. We don't know how to trust our intuition as well as we'd like. So those are some things right away that I recognize that he was doing. For me, it was the fact that I was a leader and vulnerable in the sense of I was probably more virginal. I think that my leadership stance was kind of attracted to him because it was like taking down the person that couldn't be touched. And not that I was so untouchable in that popularity way, but I was friends with everybody and I didn't hold grudges and I didn't gossip. And so I almost seemed like I wouldn't be a pawn, but I think that's what made me attractive to him. And then
Conquest, challenge.
yeah, it was a challenge, exactly. And these guys love control, right? So if you can find that vulnerability and exploit it, that's what gets them off. I think that that was some of the stuff that I was vulnerable, but I can tell you it can happen to anybody. Like human trafficking does not discriminate. It doesn't care where you came from, what you look like, or where you're going. It cares about your vulnerabilities. So those who have high ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, meaning those neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, they're products of divorced parents, incarcerated parents, drug addiction, and mental illnesses. Those are vulnerabilities. Predators will align their own experiences. So let's just say that predator was a child divorce parent situation. So being a product of divorce, and then they see this other child who is going through that, they can relate to them. So it makes it an easy bond for them. And that's what he was doing. He was going after those similarities, those vulnerabilities. I think also looking at the signs, if people had been able to intervene, it would have been skipping school. It would have been drinking. It would have been cutting my hair and trying to reinvent myself. It would have been seeing that I had things that my parents didn't purchase for me that were expensive. I remember one time one of the guys actually stole my cell phone and he like tried to play it off as his own. And he said the coach bought it for me.
Oh,
He
wow.
told his dad that. And I brought the box that we bought the phone in, right? Because at this point, cell phones were kind of a rarity for even high schoolers to have. So I had one, and he had the barcode like scratched off of the phone, but you could see some of the numbers still, right? And
Hmm.
so when I brought the box to his dad, I was like, it's my phone, but I had to put a $50 like somebody help me get my phone back, because I knew it was one of the kids in our school. We were from a small town. Anyway, there's just a lot of things that kind of stood out that made us, A, we were really vulnerable because we were kids, but B, that we had these other ailments that were against us already, not even because we did anything wrong. And then it was prestige and power.
Right. Wow. So, one of the other things I had a question about was, were there moments during the experience, like maybe during that summer or through your senior year where you realized what was happening? Like, did you realize it was human trafficking, or did you just think this is a bad situation I don't want to be in? And if so,
Uh,
how are you processing that during?
yeah, so like I mentioned, I didn't know it was called human trafficking. They called my case rape and conspiracy. Conspiracy, right? Like if you first hear that word, I think right away of being paranoid. Like, and I wasn't that, right? And I wasn't convoluting like thoughts or ideas or putting people in positions. So I get why they labeled it that, but I don't think that that gives any closure to the victim. And how do you go find counseling for conspiracy? I had no idea I was being trafficked. What I again thought was I agreed to go to this party with my friend. I didn't leave when I could have, and I deserved what happened to me because I should have known better. That's what I thought. When it was actually happening, I did panic, right? Like, so in the hot tub, I had that moment of clarity because I came to, right? I sobered up. And knowing that I was being held against my will at this coach's house when I wanted to leave. I knew there was some force, right? I knew there was some coercion, but I didn't know those words at the time. I can tell you that even after, so let's say in my 20s, where I was, working in the clubs and living with gang members, and even when I was homeless and using my body to get rides or to pay my rent, I knew that if I just didn't get hooked to heroin, I'd probably survive. And I know that sounds really like kind of crazy, but I knew that if I didn't do the hardest of the drugs, meth and heroin, then I
Right.
would survive. I could live with the way I was handling things because it had kept me alive, right? The survival. I knew I could use my body to get into things and get out of things. When I got to a point when I was living in another state, in another place, starting all over for the third or fourth time, I was like really trying hard not to go back that way. I wanted this sense of freedom. Like, why did I keep finding myself in the same situations with the same kind of people, even though I'd moved thousands of miles in different directions? I don't think that survivors know. And I'll be really honest, victims don't self identify as being trafficked. They're in domestic violence situations, they're in drug situations, they're in homeless situations. And we really don't identify the victim, even in a criminal situation. We look at prostitution as a criminal offense and not a victim who's being given a choice of lesser of two evils. Right? Do I go hungry or do I use my body to get money to buy food?
And on that, do I do it myself and feel like I have some control, like I have taken back some control, or do I just let somebody else do it to me? There's so much
So
you said in this that is, it's pertinent to human trafficking, obviously, yes, but also people that are survivors of sexual abuse across the board is the guilt that you feel, the shame that you feel, the way that you feel like, well, if I could just do it myself, then I have taken the control. It's really me making this choice, rather than I've been put in a position where this is the only choice I feel like I'm allowed to make.
right. And honestly, that's the biggest problem that we have to overcome. Because here's what I know now. I said hurt people hurt people. When you're a victim and you get sick of being a victim, you have a choice, right? You break free and you find help and you restore. But most people become abusers themselves because it's easier, right? You're
Right.
still in the same lifestyle. Your brain is still rewired. You're still surrounded and doing the same things, but this time you're not the one getting hurt. And I did become that. It was so easy for me to be like, yes, no, as I swiped left, swiped right, right? And I knew who would be vulnerable and do what I wanted. And then I could just leave them because I didn't care. I didn't need them after, that. I definitely think that that is a difficult thing, is gaining your control back and using your power for good versus creating more evil.
Right, right. Wow. So that kind of leads into my question about significant challenges you faced in actually leaving the situation. So I know you talked about for about a decade you were kind of moving and reinventing, and we actually met for coffee earlier this month, and I got the full story, which is absolutely fantastic. So if you reach out to Alicia, it's a fantastic story, the full story. But what were the challenges you faced in leaving and getting out of this situation and taking back control for good?
Yeah. So the night of the hot tub, was the force of being stuck there. And that's what a lot of survivors will experience. There's physical force that keeps them there, neglect, deprivation, you know, food, water, shelter. Uh, but for me, I was able to go home the next day, right? And home became almost a scary place too. What actually happens is this trauma bonding. And it's you're so connected emotionally, romantically, or just by survival needs, right? Food, water, shelter, to the person who's hurting you. Stockholm syndrome is very real. You fall in love with your abuser because they use this control cycle, and it's good for a little bit, right? So even though the bad thing happened and I remembered some pieces, I couldn't remember all. So I doubted myself. And I had to trust the people who were there and witnessed and told me, you got in that hot tub all by yourself. I'm like, no, I didn't. And they're like,
Oh,
yes, you did.
and that is the
Right.
thing. That is the thing. And that is why so many people use drugs and alcohol to perpetrate these atrocities on victims so
Hmm.
that you don't remember, so that you can't
Yep.
have a clear story, so that when you go and tell somebody, I think, they say you think or you know.
Exactly. Right. So now we're gaslighting them.
Right.
Right. That didn't really happen. It wasn't as bad as you said. So it's all emotional. I think that's a misconception about trafficking is that people think that it's just a physical thing, and it's really a mental and emotional thing. So we have these new like symptoms and syndromes of things that we never had before. PTSD kicks in, and everything reminds me of that. If I see one of those guys, I cringe. I get nervous, like hearing the sound of the car.
Mm,
For children, it might even be the sound of a door shutting or footsteps because they know that abuse is coming.
right.
And so I couldn't just like leave though, right? I still lived there and had to go to school with those people.
Right.
The coach actually quits the summer that he does this to me and goes to a new school. But those juniors became seniors, just like me, right? And so his people were there, and that's when the bullying started, and my car tires being slashed, and them, threatening my dad or my brother and my dog, and like threatening to tell and expose me. All of these things, even down to I remember the Christmas kind of holiday came up my senior year, and my math teacher, who was also the girls' track coach, said, "Hey, we're going to have an end of the semester party, but not that kind of party, Alicia, in front of everybody
Oh, wow.
in that class." It was like it's this mind game. You can't leave this space if everything reminds you of that. And even when you leave, then you have nightmares and visions and all these things that, pull you back to be a part of that moment right then and there. It was like I was being raped in a hot tub every time a guy talked to me inappropriately. Somebody would say something sarcastic sexually, and I would have a nightmare that night. The brain was so moldable and feasible to this abuse that it just kept going, even though I left the situation.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Just emotionally raw. And then that susceptibility, it continues to perpetuate the cycle.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to ask one more question for this episode and tease a little bit of the next episode, if that's all right with you.
Yep.
My question is, has your faith played a role in your healing journey and the work that you do now?
I would say it is the main motivator. Like I said, tried to travel the world and do things myself, and I kept finding myself broken and abandoned and isolated. So I'll tell you that after I met that survivor many years later, I met a pastor right after that. Now, I did not have a walk with God. In fact, I hated the idea of God. Why would he let this happen to me? I remember crying many nights and being like, how can people say that God is loving when I'm sitting here, broken? And I heard this pastor say, stop searching the world for your purpose. That hit me like I've been doing that. And he said, "Get down on your knees and ask God for what breaks his heart for you." And that was the pinnacle moment because I did that. And God, spoke directly to me and said, "Find my missing children." And that to me was the most eye opening, jaw dropping, enlightening experience I'd ever had. And I swear to you, I was like supernatural knowledge just downpoured into my brain. And I knew so much about human trafficking from that moment on. And I knew that it was my job. I thought it was kids, missing kids, like the misconceptions that we have, that it's just a random stranger picking up a kid and taking them to a third world country. But really, it's people we
Mm.
know.
Right.
And so I'll just close with this is that I have been obedient ever since. It has healed me in so many different ways I can't explain. And I can tell you that I won't stop because I know that when I be obedient to his calling for me and find those missing children, he's not just talking about kids, he's talking about lost souls.
Yes.
And those are in front of us every single day.
Okay, so I promised myself when we talked and we got coffee, I teared up like 3 times during your story, and I promised myself I wasn't going to do that. But you just told me that part again, and I did. So I don't know if you listeners are out there and you have a dry eye, I question you. What a powerful, powerful story, and I'm really excited. The next episode, we're going to really hit on some of these misconceptions on
Okay.
how people are very probably contributing to human trafficking and they don't know it. And just some of these other ways that we can be aware of our surroundings and as a community come around survivors. So thank you so much for your time for today. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much, Micaela. Thanks for having us.
Thank y'all for joining us for the first installment of our series with Alicia. Her story is one of immense courage and serves as a powerful reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, there is hope and healing. In our next episode, we'll discuss the misconceptions about human trafficking, how mental health plays a role in recovery, and the steps we can take to prevent trafficking in our own communities. You may even find out if you've been contributing to human trafficking. If you have any comments or questions about today's episode, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out via email at shootin.the.breeze247@gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram. My handle is at shootin_the_breeze_podcast. You can also share your thoughts by commenting on any platform where the podcast is available, including YouTube, Spotify, Prime Music, and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. It also helps the show grow. This episode was written and produced by me, Micaela Rollo-Kerwin, with original score by Gavin Horde and graphic design by me. Thank you for listening, and until next time, enjoy your sweet tea, keep the faith, and continue spreading awareness. Together, we can make a difference.